Hey everybody, welcome back. In this video I'm going to address a lot of questions that I've been receiving lately about doing different textures or finishing and maybe even doing some pre-polishing or polishing. Well, I've partnered again with the great people at Gesswein, and I have a whole line of items that I use here in my studio that I'm going to introduce you to, just so that you can see how I get some of the effects that I get. Let's jump in and take a look now. You can see here I have a wide variety of different tools and items. Now, these are things that I like to use here in my studio. They get into tight little spots. None of this is really used on a big polishing arbor. However, it can be. But what I'm going to show you is everything that can be done with either a flex shaft or a micromotor, or simply done by hand. The Snap-on Disc Assortment Kit comes with 120 different Snap-on wheels, 10 of each grit. It also comes with 2 of your Snap-on mandrels. These are 3/32 inch mandrels. So here we have 2 different sanding options. We have our belt sticks. They are color coded, both the bands and the sticks themselves, so that you can easily identify them. We also have some sanding detailers. The belt stick features an aluminum oxide, whereas the detailer features a 3M microfinishing film. You have 3 different surfaces. There's a flat, an angled, as well as a rounded tip. Moving or changing the belts is easy to do. On the belt stick, the tension point is at the end of the stick, whereas on the detail stick, it is more in the middle. To move or change the belt, I'm simply going to apply a little pressure to release the tension on the belt. Adjust the belt and put it back into position, and once more release that stick to apply the tension, and we are now ready to go. You can see here that I now have a clean area to work with back at the tip. The shape of the sticks allow me to work in tight little spots, but you can also use the flat side for a more broad sanding and finishing. The edges are smooth, which allow you to work right up against a setting or other element, the tube rivet in this instance. I can also use them to work inside of pierced cutouts and around the outsides of different elements. Again, this might be a little bit more tricky, and it definitely helps if you have a larger opening to work with. The Micromesh Ultraflex pads are handy for doing smaller jobs and spot repair projects. Each of them feature a 2" by 2" core foam. Each pad has the same micromesh grade on both sides, and it is made to be used either wet or dry. Let's jump in and look at an actual example. On this piece, I have soldered a piece of silver onto a copper, and you'll see that there's some different solder areas. We've got some scratches that need to be cleared up. I overdid this one a little bit on purpose so that I could show you how to clean up the solder. First, I'm going to start with 150 grit MX pad. This is just going to allow me to really aggressively get in and remove some of that solder that has overflowed. I'm going to clean up the edge with one of my sanding belt sticks, and that's going to allow me to get up next to that heart and get that really close right there on that ledge. Next up, I'm going to use that same sanding stick to work my way around the outer edges of this, kind of clean things up and smooth them out. You can get into nice tight little areas. We're going to progress to a 240 grit, and that's going to allow me to really clean things up. Notice that I'm not able to remove that little bump right there. That is an actual indent, not just a scratch on the piece. Here on the back, I have a rogue piece of solder that was probably on my board, and now I'm going to jump over to the Moore's disc and make quick work of some of the removal of this. I'm using a finer microfinishing paper here, but you have a whole assortment you can use. Once again, I still have a little bit of rogue silver solder that kind of flowed over. Again, this makes very quick work of all that cleanup. The mounted texturing wheels are wonderful, and they can be purchased individually as well. So going from the coarsest to the finest, we have the black, which is 0.8 millimeters. And when you're talking about 0.8 millimeters, it's talking about each one of these little wires on here that is going to be used to impart that texture. Your gray is a coarse with 0.7, green is a medium with 0.6, blue has a medium fine with a 0.45, 0.3 for a fine on the red, and a 0.2 for an extra fine on the yellow. For the back of the piece, I want to really texture this up. I'm going to use the mounted texturing wheels to impart a beautiful stardust texture. You want to go easy on this and be very careful. Watch your fingers, keep those clear so that you don't take off any of your skin, because it will quite quickly. As you can see, it just works very, very fast. And now you can see the difference between the areas that we have done. I'm going to finish this and do the whole back piece. On the front, I'm going to use a finer wheel, and this will give me a beautiful satin finish. I like this because I can get right up next to that ledge and it just gives me that beautiful finish. Here you can see kind of that satin finish compared to just a sanded finish on the silver. To even out the area on the silver, I'm going to use the 400 MX pad just to smooth things out just a little bit and prep this for my next texture. The surface is now a little more regular and I'm not worried about it too much as I'm going to be adding some texture, but I do want to smooth out a little bit more on the side walls. I'm going to be using the 240 MX pad for this, but I'm not able to get into all of the tight spots. So here I'm going to switch to a Mohr's disc for this. It is flexible and will allow me to work into those tight and sometimes differently shaped areas. You'll notice that I can just run this along that edge, plus I can clean up other areas that might be a little bit more difficult with a more rigid sanding accessory. Next, I'm going to use the gray texture wheel for a Stardust effect on the silver piece. Notice how nicely it contrasts with the more smooth satin finish that I did earlier on the copper side. In this example, I have created a post earring, and you can see that there is quite a bit of solder around the post that I would like to clean up and remove. I'm going to use one of the finer grit Mohr's discs to remove excess solder and even out the back of the surface. In this case, I'm using the disc with the abrasive facing down. So I can hold the piece on my bench pin while I apply the pressure and smooth out the surface. Now that this is all smoothed out and I've removed all the excess solder, I'm going to use a felt-backed disc. In this case, I want to still do some of the prep work. I'm going to load this with the red Luxor, which is a pre-polished used to remove scratches and surface blemishes. Because these are smooth and flexible, I have the ability to work in all different areas. I can work right up against small areas such as these corners on this post earring here. On the round earrings, I want to clean up the bottom disc, and trying to get into that small area with sandpaper is going to be really difficult, but with the thinness and the flexibility of the Mohr's discs, I am able to quite easily. In this case, the abrasive is facing down. Now I can take this and swap it around so that the abrasive is facing out, and it allows me to work with more broad surfaces. People ask me all the time about flap wheels. These are made of aluminum oxide with a resin bonded cloth permanently attached to the hub. It has a 1/8 inch shank for a little more stability, and in this case I'm using a 240 grit. They are great on flat and contoured surfaces. I use this for blending surfaces, deburring, and sometimes just adding a little bit of texture. Once I have prepped my surface, it is time to polish. If you haven't already, be sure you are wearing a mask and safety glasses. Depending on the desired finish, there is a process we can follow. Starting with the red Luxor, you're going to remove tough, deep scratches. Then, depending on the material you are using, we move to green for silver and white colored metals, or gray compound for gold colored metals. These will remove medium scratches, imperfections, and help with blending. Blue is used for a final finish, removing minor scratches. Yellow is a pre or a final finish prep. White will impart a fine polish and final finish, and orange is your go-to if you want that extreme mirror finish. I'm going to use 3 different mops or buffs. The string buff is soft and great for a final finish with light pressure. I like to use the felt with my pre-finishing compounds, but to start, I'm going to be using a muslin buff with the more aggressive compounds to get started. To prep my buff, I run it against the edge of my bench pin and remove any of the loose fibers. You will find that it leaves some long stray strands. Simply cut those off with a pair of scissors. Then load with your compound and begin to work around the surface of your item. You can see it working already. When I am done working with a compound or buff, I want to keep them separate from the others to avoid contamination. I use pencil boxes and store the buffs and the compound together. The boxes are labeled with the color compound and what it is used for. Moving on to the next step, I'm using the tri-felt wheel and with the blue finishing compound to remove just a few more minor scratches. I want to buff in a perpendicular direction to the step before, just as I do when sanding. This will ensure that I remove the marks from the previous step. For the final step, I'm going to use the orange compound with a string cotton mop. I prep just as I did the others, running it on the side of my bench pin, then load it up with the compound. It's not going to take much. With a very light touch, I work my way around the surface of my piece to get a nice high shine. Had I really worked on prepping my surface before polishing, I would be left with a beautiful mirror polish. But look at the difference from the inside to the outside of the ring.